Turning now to space, ever since Neil Armstrong made his giant leap for mankind, NASA has been the world's undisputed leader. And after the moon, NASA was the first to successfully fly by, orbit, and land on Mars. But these breathtaking photos of the Philae lander touching down on a comet remind us that it was the European Space Agency that won the most recent race, and we're currently hitchhiking rides to the space station with the Russians. So is NASA falling behind? Joining us here in New York is Michael Lemonick, who writes about space and science for Time and National Geographic magazines. And also here in New York is Dave Brody, science and technology writer for Space.com. Guys, good to have you both here. There's some crowing out of Europe about the European Space Agency managing this marvel of landing on that comet.
Right.
Is that an indication that we are falling behind, that they have somehow ahead?
I wouldn't go that far. They haven't leaped ahead, but they are neck and neck with us now. And we've got some big missions coming up, but we are no longer the only game in town when it comes to these things.
You agree, Dave? Because we certainly have seen a lot. We have no unmanned flight anymore. The former NASA administrator, Michael Griffin, says that we're held hostage by the Russians when it comes to getting to the International Space Station.
Well, I suppose some of that is true, but I don't think the situation is quite as bad as we make out. And first of all congratulations to the Europeans for that spectacular mission. But let's not forget there was some NASA participation in that mission as well. So to me, it's a species thing. I think it makes sense for us to attack this as humanity, not necessarily as individual nations.
Because that is the irony. The NASA really not only participated, it really was originally a NASA project, but it was the funding cuts for NASA that led to the European Space Agency taking it over.
That's partially true. It was a mission called CRAF, the Comet Rendezvous Asteroid Flyby mission back in the early 90s that the U.S. backed out of. It's not the first time or the last time that the United States has done that to the Europeans. So if there's a lesson to be learned here, it's let's respect those folks across the pond, because they really can do space and do it quite well.
And it's not just the folks across the pond. We're seeing serious competition from China, some from India.
Right.
There are space programs now around the world.
Right, right. Lots and lots of countries now are intending to go into space and trying to do it, and increasingly they will do it. And they've got a long way to go to catch up to us and to the Europeans, but there's no reason that some of them can't.
And they're doing it more cheaply. One of the amazing things I read was about China getting this craft to orbit Mars, and they did it for less than it cost Hollywood to produce the movie Gravity.
Right. Actually, I think that was in
India. I'm sorry,
India.
I misspoke.
But just like China, it's a low-cost place that has a lot of very smart people, very well-trained people, who are increasingly able to do these things.
So what we're in the United States is we're handing a lot of this over to private industry. Is that a good idea?
Depends on what it is that you're talking about. I think like in an orchestra, right? You need the right instrument to play the right voice. You don't ask the piccolo player to play the tuba part. So clearly for cargo and even personnel to and from space station, that's absolutely something that the private sector can do and has been engaged by NASA to do. When you're talking about maintaining a national reconnaissance satellite, that's an entirely different proposition.
But NASA did so much. It was such a glory of American technology. Why, if it was so successful for so long, should we hand this over to private industry?
Well, it's because it costs a huge amount of money, and Congress is increasingly reluctant to spend that money, and that's just a fact of life.
And when it does spend it, if I may interrupt, it tends to tell NASA where to spend its money. And last time I checked, the Congress was not populated by rocket scientists or astrophysicists. They're good folks, but that's not what they know how to do.
And it also takes Congress a while to make any decisions. Private industry can be much more nimble.
Private industry is much more nimble, and private industry does not have to worry about making sure that a bunch of influential congressional districts each get a piece of a project.
Which is exactly what's happening now, and you can see this in the space launch system that NASA has been tasked with developing. It's a big rocket. I'm not against having a heavy lift launch vehicle, but is that really the best and most cost-effective way to do space? In fact, some in the community refer to it as the Senate launch vehicle, because NASA's been told what to build.
Right. And can competition also make things cheaper?
Competition can make things cheaper. It leads to greater innovation. Modern aviation industry is a private industry, and if you try and imagine that the government ran all of our aviation and all of our airlines, it might not run so well.
Yeah, you'd have 6 or 8 government employees going to explore 3 or 4 times a year, and that's all you'd have.
But on the other hand, we saw what happened with the orbital science rocket that crashed soon after takeoff, and what has now happened with Virgin Galactic. So are you concerned about how private industry is doing?
Yes and no. I think space is really, really difficult to do, and the more that engineers learn how to do it in different ways, the better off eventually we will all do it.
And the thing is that you know, nobody really remembers or talks about the fact that that jet fighters are flown initially by test pilots, and they have been all along the way, and those pilots sometimes die in crashes, and they just weren't publicized, and that's the big difference. The idea that we can go to space without casualties in that very dangerous and complicated environment, it's just not realistic. But we've kind of been led to believe that that somehow it can be done. It's not possible, and we're never going to make any progress.
And we should say that NASA has had its problems too, because it had issues with the telescopes. It's had issues with how it's dealt. You know, it's been criticized for how poorly it's done in this whole asteroid identification project that they have.
Well, guess what? Space is difficult, and yes, wherever bureaucracy is involved, the chances of error are multiplied because you have so many people looking at tiny, tiny pieces of the issue. We tend to do things better in smaller groups, which once again argues for some of what the private industry is trying to do.
On the other hand, is it important to have NASA there for those big, big projects, to focus on that great next leap to get us to Mars, humans to Mars, or to be able to figure out how to stop an asteroid that might threaten the Earth?
Yeah, I think it's probably necessary to have an agency overseeing some of those projects, or the big science projects like the Hubble Space Telescope. It would have been very hard to fund that, certainly with private industry, because there's no real profit in it. So big science, asteroid landings, and the New Horizons mission that's going to be reaching Pluto in July are the kinds of things that NASA at least has to oversee.
And the NASA program has, of course, been tremendously inspirational for people. Do you think that this new environment will be similarly inspirational?
Even more so, because let's look at the population that is going to be funding these things. They are the millennials. They grew up with the paradigm of the successful independent computer entrepreneur and telecommunications entrepreneur. So they're all about this idea that a high net worth individual can realize his or her vision and actually get somewhere in the universe.
You agree?
Yeah, I do. I mean, in fact, look at Elon Musk, who is in fact a tech billionaire,
right,
who is now going into space.
Richard Branson, also a billionaire, but not a tech one. But
right.
Jeff Bezos, same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah. All getting involved. Well, let's hope this does work out for the American space program, and it's really a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Good to see you both.